Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Dani Gordon, an expert in CBD and cannabis medicine and the author of the book, The CBD Bible. Dr. Dani is a double board certified medical doctor and integrative medicine physician. She has advised the UN, governments, and physician bodies on the use of medicinal cannabis and has also co-founded the UK Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, trained the UK's first cannabis medicine specialist, and helped set up the UK's first cannabis medicine clinics. For anyone that's interested in CBD, especially its use for period pain, this episode is a must listen. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Lenise.
So let's start off by getting into the story of your first period. Can you tell us what happened?
So I was trying to think back to my first period when you emailed me, and I was thinking, gosh, I don't have, a very, very clear recollection for some of the parts, but certainly I remember that I was 12. I was a competitive swimmer at the time. So it was kind of a big deal because, of course, I was training at quite a high level in the swimming pool, and I needed to think about what I was going to do when I had my period. A lot of people on the swim team who were my age were taking days off of training when they had their period. And it was the big decision almost right away. Do I use a tampon? Which is kind of almost a traumatic decision for a 12-year-old. But I was really lucky. My parents were really supportive of just body image stuff in general. And my mom was really supportive. So we talked it out. And I think I had a few periods in, and then she basically taught me how to use a tampon. And it went okay. And I went to swim practice, and I remember feeling pretty empowered because I didn't have to take, practices off when I had my period. So I think that's the thing I remember most about my first period was I was one of my first friends to use a tampon. And then of course everyone wanted to know about it. And it was a big deal. So I didn't really have any, bad periods per se when I first started menstruating. But definitely when I was a teenager, 15, 16, I did get some heavy periods. I think partly it was due to stress. I was a very driven teenager. I was very academic. I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think looking back, a lot of it was related to when I was overly stressed or kind of, stretched too thin with my academics and my sport. And I remember going up the stairs of my high school, and we had to wear uniforms, so I had to wear a kilt. And I remember feeling blood trickling down my leg walking up the stairs and just being mortified. And then I had a big patch of period blood on my kilt, and I had to wrap, my sweater around my waist for the rest of the day. So I think those are kind of two of the the most emblazoned period memories I have, probably from being a teenager. So, nothing too dramatic, but certainly that, that walking up the stairs, worrying about boys, seeing me. I think those are things that a lot of, women go through, and no one really talks about them. So I often talk about these things when I do talks about women's health.
And going back to when you got your first period, you said it was really empowering. Your mom taught you how to use a tampon, and knowing that, so swimming is quite intense. You're in the water. You never had any issues after you learned how to use a tampon with your swimming on your period?
No, I was actually really lucky. I think that part was really easy. It was kind of later on when I started to have some heavy periods that I started to really connect it to, maybe this is stress related. What can I do about this really heavy period that I'm having? But the first few years, my periods were quite light, and I just was able to use kind of the junior tampon, and I went to swim practice, and it was almost like it wasn't a big deal. I remember even having a big race when I had my period, probably when I was about 13, and I did a lot of visualization as part of my training. So I would visualize myself feeling more powerful because I was having my period and going through this race, rather than, I think, the other way of thinking about it is, oh, I'm going to be really tired for this race. Or maybe if someone had a heavy period, they would be really tired. So I think generally my first experiences were positive. But certainly, I think the fact that I remember that walking up the stairs and, bleeding, it was probably a bit of a traumatic occurrence.
And you said that you linked having a heavy period with stress, which is quite advanced. When I think about the other guests that I've had on the show, or other women I've spoken to, when they've had heavy periods, often they're not sure why they have heavy periods, and they just kind of get on with it. How did you make that connection, and how did you learn about what was happening to you?
I think it was just kind of a thought that I had really when I was a teenager. And, when I was 16, I went into university when I was 17, and I already knew I wanted to do medicine. So I was already kind of have a bit of a scientific mind, I think, thinking about these things. But, there was not a lot of information out there. Like when I went to my doctor about my heavy periods, he said, well, you can go on the pill if you want. And that's what I ended up doing, because I also wanted birth control when I was around 16. So again, I talked it over with my mom. My mom was really supportive. And she said, if you're going to be sexually active, you want to be safe, and you should go on a birth control pill and all these things, and then it'll help your periods. And I also had some teenage acne. So those three things kind of led me to the pill. But when I went to discuss that with my medical doctor as a teenager, there was not even any discussion of stress and periods, really. That was something I just kind of thought about. And what did I do about it? Well, nothing really concrete, really, at the time. I guess I was just trying to connect the dots. And really, as I got into university and I had to really manage my stress, I got more into yoga and meditation quite early. I started doing yoga when I was like 18 to help with stress at university. So I think for me, it was just a gradual kind of realization. Versus the doctor's opinion at the time, the GP's opinion was, okay, if you have bad periods or if you have hormonal imbalances, just suppress it with the pill. That's the only option. It wasn't really ever discussed anything else that could be a factor. And of course, I'm not against going on the pill either. Some of my patients say the pills like saved them, or going on an IUD. So I'm not against, the Western medical solutions, but I do think when it's offered as the only conversation for women, that can be a little bit limiting, or a lot limiting. I think this idea that the only thing to do when you have a bad period is just suppress it, rather than digging, as you said, into, is stress playing a factor? Are hormones playing a factor? I didn't learn really about the fact that we had hormone cycles until I was in medical school properly, about, so maybe I feel more energized and I can do more cardio training in the first half of my cycle versus in the second half of my cycle. I'm going to generally feel maybe not so energized, and I need to be more eating different foods, having a more nourishing diet, a more nourishing routine, avoiding the caffeine. Those things I didn't learn about until I learned about the anatomy and kind of physiology of periods in medical school. Mm-hmm. And even then, they just taught us the kind of medical parts, but they didn't ever connect it back with saying, this is how you can change your lifestyle around your period. It was just purely like, this is what the hormone levels do at this day. So I felt like it was really disconnected. I had to kind of connect the dots myself.
And when you were making those connections, so, I mean, by the way, everything you're saying is music to my ears. But when you were making those connections and when you're putting the pieces together, and did it change what you thought about being on the pill? And talk a little bit about your journey coming off the pill.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the main reasons I really liked the pill is because I had this teenage acne. So of course, my mom wanted to help me with my acne. I remember she bought me this expensive infomercial kind of natural system for my acne, and it didn't really work, but she really wanted to help me. My mom, I was really lucky. I had really supportive parents. So when I decided to come off the pill, it was really, I guess it was near the end of medical school. So I was 24 at the time. So I'd been on the pill for almost a decade. And I didn't really have any side effects on the pill. I felt fine. My skin looked great. I didn't have bad periods. I had very light periods. But one of the things that made me consider coming off it, actually, is really two things. The first one was I started to study more natural medicine at the same time as I was taking my medical degree. And I got really interested in getting in touch with my cycles and the fact that, when you're on the period, you have pill periods, you're not really in touch with your natural cycles. So I really wanted to see what would happen if I had a natural cycle and I got into a natural rhythm. What would happen to my emotions? Would I have a better sex drive? And I didn't really even know that my sex drive was lower on the pill necessarily, but I wondered if things like, for example, reaching orgasm was a problem on the pill, because it's another thing I didn't really understand fully at the time, even though I had a boyfriend and I was sexually active. But I didn't feel like it was easy for me to have an orgasm. And I was like, okay, well, of course, I was in medical school, so I was doing all this research. And I was like, I wonder if it's the pill. I wonder if apparently the pill can, cause this. So there was all these little things that kind of led me to say, well, I think I just want to try coming off of it. So that's what I did. And when I stopped the pill, it was a really interesting process for a few reasons. The first thing is when you come off the pill, when you're, this is, I guess, 15 years ago, the first reaction to a boyfriend, of course, is, oh, now we have to use, condoms. They don't like it very much. So first of all, you have the male pressure. Second of all, my skin just went crazy. So my skin, it gradually got worse. And then my acne really, really came back. And my periods did get heavier. So I had that to deal with. And, but I decided actually to stay off of it because I did find my sex drive did increase and I really liked it. And I did feel like it was easier for me to reach orgasm, in sexual intercourse. And I just thought that was such a great benefit that I really wanted to see what else I could do naturally. And then that was kind of the beginning of me going down more of a natural route towards kind of managing my cycles, realizing that if I wasn't on the pill, I did some topical treatments for my acne. So I used the benzoyl peroxide and, I used a few, the vitamin A acids. I was really lucky. I didn't have to do any Accutane or anything. So I kind of managed my skin like that. I got into really looking at my cycle as kind of a cycle, not me feeling the same way every day. And that really helped. And I really started to look at my stress levels, and I added herbals like ashwagandha. I started taking a lot of herbal supplements. I was already had a very healthy diet, but I started adding more healthy oils to my diet. And all those things just really helped. So I never went back on the pill. And I think the biggest pressure to go back on the pill over the years has probably been, boyfriends and guys, because it's a pain in the butt when you're in a long-term relationship, to not be on the pill. But I decided I was really going to stick with my decision. And for me, it's been the best decision. I wouldn't say that for everybody, of course. But yeah, it was a big shift for me, I think.
Can you talk a little bit more about the connection between the pill and libido? Because what you've said is quite interesting. And you said that when you were on it, you still were having sex, but you noticed that when you came off it, your orgasms were more intense. As a physician, can you talk a little bit more about why that might be?
So it's not really a very well studied area, to be honest, but some women find that they have trouble reaching orgasm when they are on the pill. And it's probably because the way the pill affects our natural hormones. But we don't know exactly why. And some women don't find a difference and some women do. And I think because of the lack of really sexual education to the point of focusing on women's orgasms. When I was a teenager, I didn't really know a lot about how to have an orgasm or, how to self-pleasure and all these things. So for me, when I first started having intercourse with my first, serious boyfriend, I was 17. I really didn't know much about it. I just thought having good sex was feeling pleasure and not feeling pain. And that was kind of it. And I didn't really talk about what I liked with my partner or how for him to help me have an orgasm, because I didn't really know that myself. So I think it was a lack of, awareness about women's orgasm in general, that led me to really maybe take a few more years to kind of put the connection together. Oh, I wonder if I'm not having orgasms when I have intercourse with a partner, partly because, maybe I don't know how to, pleasure myself properly. And I went on that journey. And then the other thing is, I wonder if it's the pills. So, we don't really know, but a lot of my patients will say the same thing. They will, and oftentimes, unless I ask them, they will never even bring it up. But I often will ask on certain medications as well. How is your libido? How are you able to reach orgasm? Are you happy with it? And some women don't care, and that's fine too. Some women are just not really into sex that much, and everyone's different. But if it bothers them that they're not having orgasms, or if their libido is low and it bothers them, then I think the pill is something to look at. Definitely is a possible factor.
I want to talk more about the connection between stress and periods, because it's certainly something that I'm seeing a lot in my practice, where being in the pandemic, being in lockdown, women are coming to me and saying my period is late, or it's missing, or it's longer, or it's more painful. And you've talked about the connection between the changes in your period and stress. For listeners who are putting the pieces together for themselves, can you talk a little bit more about why that connection happens?
Definitely. So this is something we know a lot about, actually. And I think doctors should talk more about it. So when your cortisol, when your stress hormone levels are high chronically, meaning over a longer period of time, so you tend to crave sweets and carbohydrates, because the body thinks that you're constantly trying to run away from, I say, a saber-toothed tiger. So the body gets confused, because we're supposed to have this rush of stress hormone when we're in physical danger. So when we were cavemen, we were, living our life in the jungle, and everything was great. And then we would see a saber-tooth tiger, and the cortisol would come on. It would enable us to run away from the tiger, give us that muscle energy. And then the cortisol would go back down once the tiger was gone. But in modern life, we have all these mental threats. So, your boss emails you something stressful, you have a due date at work, you have a fight with your partner. All these little things build up. And the body treats it the same way as if you were constantly running away from a tiger, if you're not managing your stress. So what happens instead of the cortisol coming back down, is it stays high. So you get those food cravings. It even affects memory consolidation. So you feel foggy, but kind of wired. So I call it the tired but wired problem. Irritable on edge, but unable to wind down. You don't make as much sleep hormone at night naturally, so your body can't sleep as deeply. And then it's this vicious cycle. And then you need more caffeine, like a little bit of caffeine in the morning. Like I drink a cup of coffee in the morning, but I just limit it to one. And for most people, that's okay. But if you're needing caffeine more than, I say, really a cup or two in the morning every day, and you need it to wake up, that's potentially a sign that, your body is feeling quite stressed chronically. So all these things, of course, go back to affect our women's hormones that balance our cycles. Because if we're not sleeping properly, we're not eating the right foods, we're not supporting our women's hormonal system, then things start to get out of balance and period problems show up. And then there's genetics. So some women are blessed with just being, I call it having a high stress set point. And some people are not, and it's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. Partially genetics, partially environment, partially what we're conditioned over the years, our life experience, all these factors. So that's really how stress plays quite a central role.
Hmm. That's really interesting. And I think that will be really helpful for listeners who are trying to understand why the changes that they've been experiencing recently have manifested in their period. So now I want to talk a little bit more about your journey into becoming an integrative physician. So for listeners who don't know, can you explain what an integrative physician is?
Sure. So, like we chatted about earlier, so I'm trained as a conventional medical doctor. So I went through the normal training, but throughout my training, and it really did start with me really getting interested in stress myself. And I've always been interested, I was a teenager about stress and its effects. But in my third year of medical school, I went through a very challenging period, and I had a sexual harassment case with a senior physician that I was under his tutelage, and it was very, very stressful. And in the end, my school ended up being very supportive. I ended up reporting him, but it went on for a few months, and I reached the point where I felt so stressed that I didn't want to go to work. I felt like I honestly knew what my patients with depression felt like, because I was just so underslept and stressed. And it was really a turning point for me. Like, I knew I was interested in holistic medicine before that, but after that, I got really into meditation and managing stress, and really just being and connecting with myself on a deeper level. So I decided to start taking courses in natural medicine. So I took a course in Chinese traditional medicine at my university. I was one of about 4 students. It wasn't very popular at the time. I'd already done some training in nutrition, some courses, but I did more of that. And then I just kind of continued on doing courses. And then when I graduated and opened my practice in family medicine, I decided, because after about 6 months, a lot of my patients were just having all these chronic conditions that weren't getting better with the pill alone approach. Although, of course, I'm not anti-drug. I wanted to give them more. So I ended up seeking out a program in the United States called the Integrative Medicine Fellowship, which is for conventional medicine doctors to do basically a 2-year fellowship program. And what we learn in that program is basically evidence-based natural medicine. So we do mind-body medicine. So we learn about mindfulness, nbsp, mindfulness, stress reduction, meditation, everything from lifestyle medicine to how exercise affects us, nutritional medicine. And then, of course, the other arm of that was botanical medicine, which really led me into cannabis medicine and CBD. So I went and did that, and I brought that back to my practice, and I started using botanicals alongside drugs with my patients. I started using lifestyle approaches, ranging from the very, very simple to the more complex, and using functional medicine testing, that kind of thing. So that was really my journey. I really added it because I was seeing a need with my patients, and it was what I was doing myself. Because I always said, I would love to offer my patients the same quality of wellness and education about their health as I would want myself. And I take supplements myself. I take herbals. I try to minimize the use of drugs. I mean, all of these things I wanted to do for myself. I really wanted to share with my patients. And the unique thing about the integrative medicine program in the US, and now they have it at Harvard, University of Arizona, UCLA. So this is a fully board qualified specialty of conventional medicine in the US now. So that was a big deal. This is a new specialty basically in the last few years. When I did it in 2012, I was one of the first, if I wasn't the first, I was one of the first in Canada to do it. And then it became a fully board qualified specialty, just like cardiology or OBGYN in 2017. It's still not recognized as a full specialty in the UK. It's just recognized as a special interest. But the cool thing about it is it's all evidence-based. So, I did a course at Harvard with the father of mind-body medicine, Herbert Benson. And I studied with these amazing doctors who were all medical doctors, but they were using their medical expertise to really go beyond the drugs-only approach. So everything in integrative medicine has evidence. That's what's really unique about it. In terms of the natural medicine world, is it's all really based in research and evidence. And I really like that approach as a scientist.
You mentioned that you've then had been focusing on botanicals, so herbs, and you mentioned CBD. So for listeners who aren't familiar, tell us what CBD is.
Sure. So when I first started getting into botanical medicine, I've been using, botanicals in my practice for about a decade. So it wasn't the first one that I used, certainly. But what really led me to it was a lot of my patients were in Canada, were my really bad chronic pain patients, my cancer patients, my palliative care patients. Some of them were starting to grow their own cannabis or get cannabis oils from like a local kind of black market at the time herbalist. And I got really curious about that because I was also, I was prescribing other botanicals alongside drug therapy. But I wasn't using cannabis because of the stigma. There was no commercial products at the time to prescribe. And I had a lot of baggage around the word cannabis from my medical training. And they didn't really even know the difference between CBD and THC as far as medical doctors back then. Everyone just thought cannabis bad, CBD, THC, all the same. Of course, that's not true. So, when I started realizing my patients were getting relief from their chronic pain and it was helping palliate their cancer symptoms, not cure, but just helping with the palliation and their sleep and all these things. And they were coming down off their opioids, like some of the other more harmful drugs. I was very, very curious. So I started doing a lot of my own research. I started reading a lot of research papers, which were really in animal models when I first started looking into it. There's a Canadian, well, he's actually American, but he does a lot of work in Canada too, called Dr. Ethan Russo. He was a neurologist who was doing a lot of cannabis publishing. I had a colleague in Colorado, Dr. Scott Shannon, who was a psychiatrist, conventionally trained psychiatrist, and he was starting to use CBD and medical cannabis with his patients, mainly CBD. So I got really interested and I just started researching and asking my patients and thinking maybe I should be prescribing this somehow if it's possible. So then really why I got interested in CBD specifically, it's just one chemical in the plant. But CBD does not have any, it basically does not make you high. It's called psychomimetic properties. That's THC that can make you feel high or intoxicated, although it also has medicinal properties. CBD is non-intoxicating. So it does not make you feel high or stoned or impair you in any way, but it has a lot of really powerful properties. It's an anti-inflammatory. It helps with the gut health. We think it may help kind of tone the endocannabinoid system, which is our natural cannabis producing system we have in our own bodies. I've seen it help for everything from topical use in sometimes people find it helps with their skin conditions to really serious autoimmune disorders and epilepsy and anxiety disorders. So that's, that I really got interested in very high CBD, low THC medical cannabis. That's what I, prescribe most in my practice.
For listeners who are going into this world of CBD, so we're recording from the UK, so THC is illegal here. But I know it's not. So Canada, where I'm from, originally it's not. So in the UK, if they want to dive into the world of legal cannabis, what would you recommend that they start?
It's a really good question. So in the UK, so I've moved back. I'm British and Canadian. I think like you as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're very lucky. So we moved back about 2 years ago when all this cannabis legislation was changing in the UK. So currently here in the UK, if you are interested in trying CBD for a wellness indication, so just for helping with stress or mild to moderate anxiety, you can buy a CBD product from hemp over the counter. You can buy it at a health food store. So CBD from hemp it's still CBD, but it comes from a variety of the cannabis plant that has no THC, very low THC, or the THC has been removed. So that's legal to buy without a prescription. If you have a medical condition, then it's always safer to do it under the advice and the prescribing of a doctor, of course. So that would be someone who might have endometriosis, for example, or might have really severe PMDD, so premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, or a really severe anxiety disorder or sleep disorder. And here in the UK, I've actually been, a lot of my work since I've been back has been in the nonprofit sector and the education and government sector. So I've been training a lot of the first doctors in medical cannabis. So medical cannabis, even containing THC, is legal, but by a prescription. So if you're on a lot of medications, for example, if you have epilepsy, if you have endometriosis, then that's a reason you might want to see a doctor who specializes in this type of medicine. And again, that's what my focus of my work really in the UK. It's been training doctors in this. And I volunteer a lot of my time for a lot of the nonprofits to help train doctors. So you would see a doctor on the GMC specialist register, and they would assess you for medical cannabis, and they'd probably still prescribe high CBD, low THC, but the oil that they would prescribe for you probably has a little bit more THC than you would get in a shop. And for pain conditions, for sleep, for a lot of different medical conditions that are quite severe, that tiny bit or a little bit more of THC actually makes it work a lot better.
Really interesting. So if you're in the UK and you have severe, so like stage 4 endometriosis, and you're really struggling with the pain, so you're saying, look at the GMC register, so General Medical Council.
Well, you won't find it there. So this is where it gets complicated. The best place to go for information if you're looking for a doctor, I'm not seeing patients at the moment because I'm going on maternity leave in another 4 weeks. But I'll be back. Yeah. But in the meantime, I've worked with some lovely colleagues over here. And the best way to find them is to go to the nonprofit that I vice chair in the UK. It's called the ukmccs.org. So we're a nonprofit. All of the doctors on our council volunteer their time, including myself and our chair, Professor Mike Barnes. And we have a list of the clinics that prescribe medical cannabis across the UK. Unfortunately, they're all private at the moment. There's no NHS prescriptions being written. We're doing a lot of campaigning to try to change that. But I think, to be honest, we're quite a ways away as far as probably a few years. Unfortunately, there's a lot going on behind the scenes to get it available, but it's a slow process, I have to be honest. So sadly, it's in the private sector right now. So you have to pay privately to get the prescription and to see the doctor. But the UK MCCS website has a lot of resources so people can find out who is prescribing, what clinics are in what area, all that kind of stuff. That's the best place to go if you want medical cannabis, if you have a really severe condition. Otherwise, if you want to try CBD, it's very safe from hemp for most people. Unless you're on certain medications, again, that would be the medical category. But in general, if you're not, it's very safe to try on your own, and you can pick up a good quality CBD oil and just give it a shot yourself.
Oh, actually, for listeners, all the links that Dani just mentioned will be in the show notes. In your book, the CBD Bible, you talk about the importance of full spectrum CBD. And that's something that if you go to a shop and you want to purchase some CBD, that's something you should be looking out for. Why is that important?
It's a really good question. So full spectrum CBD is basically CBD that's been extracted from the whole plant, and it still retains at least some of those other plant chemicals in it. So there's things called other cannabinoids. So there's, something called CBDV, THCA. There's so many other plant chemicals in the plant that can be beneficial both for a wellness use and for a medical use. And they all work together in the plant because it's called what's called herbal synergy, or some people with cannabis know it as the entourage effect. So I do find that full spectrum products work the best. That being said, the rules and the laws in the UK around CBD in Europe are changing quite swiftly. And as of next year, it's probably not going to be the case that you will be able to get full spectrum CBD. It's going to be just pure CBD. which is still beneficial, but often people find they need a higher dose. So when that does happen, when those laws change, you might find that you need to up your dose, or you need to look for a product that's been kind of teched up a little bit. So there's kind of some high tech products that will probably be coming out. They'll probably be trying to add some of those other plant chemicals back in one at a time. So it's never going to be the same as full spectrum, but that will probably, unfortunately, again, this is something that I wasn't happy to see happening, but it looks like it's inevitable now. But right now, if you can get a full spectrum product, certainly, I think that does work the best at the lower doses for most people. And again, it's not universal. People always say, well, what's the evidence? Well, there's not really good big studies to prove this. There's a few animal model studies that looks at pure CBD versus full spectrum for pain in rats. And they think the full spectrum works better at lower doses, but the evidence is weak, I have to say. But clinically, from what I've seen over the years, I do think it works a bit better.
So a lot of listeners to the podcast will be really interested in everything we're talking about, and they'll be interested in how they can use CBD for specific conditions that they're facing. So there were podcasts about periods, so let's talk about period problems. So in the book, you talk about how we can use CBD if you have period pain. And you mention a kind of protocol that you can use. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a whole chapter in the book about women's health and periods. And then there's a whole nother chapter about sex and libido in CBD. So, but just distill it down. There's not a lot of big study. Well, there's no big studies for its use in periods. And this is something that I talk about in the book as being really kind of annoying and frustrating. When I was writing this chapter, is I realized even for men's health, there's more evidence and studies than for women's health conditions. And unfortunately, this is something that kind of permeates medicine. A lot of women's health conditions are understudied, although it's changing, luckily, but it is still a phenomenon we see. And this is definitely the case with CBD in women's health. That being said, CBD has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, and it can help lower stress for many people. So of course, this is definitely related to how bad periods are. It's not going to cure your period pain if you just start using a little bit of CBD, but a lot of people find that it makes a massive, massive difference in order for them to not even really notice their period pain anymore. And everything in between. Some people find it helps them 20% or 30%. Some people find it helps them 70%. Because everyone is different with response to the dose of CBD, because everyone's body responds slightly in a unique way. That all being said, if you're using it purely for period pain, but you don't have mood issues throughout the month, it's just the period pain that you want to target. A reasonable way to start would be, starting to use a CBD oil potentially, 5 days or 3 days, maybe even 3 days before your menstrual cycle starts. So you have to track on an app, for example. There's one called iPeriod that I use personally. There's lots though. And then, your period will start probably on this date. So 3 days before, you can start taking your CBD, and you could start with, say, 10 or 15 milligrams 2 or 3 times a day with a meal. And then on the days that you have bad period pain, you can really up the dose, and you could experiment with that. Of course, the cost goes up when you start really upping the dose. That's the downside. And for acute pain, like to stop pain in the moment, THC tends to work better. So that's why if you have really bad period pain, sometimes adding a little bit of THC from, say, a prescription cannabis medicine is going to be a lot more effective for you. Because CBD it helps with more kind of the chronic anti-inflammatory, anti-stress effect. And some people do find that it helps their period pain kind of more acutely, but it's not the norm, I would say.
Say, you mentioned it briefly, but I just want to dive into this a little bit more, that CBD is not a cure-all. Mm-hmm. What would you say to someone who would say to you, if I take CBD, it's going to fix all of my period problems? What would you say to them instead?
I see CBD as an amazing botanical medicine tool, but unfortunately, just like anything in botanical medicine or anything in medicine in general, either Western medicine or natural medicine, there is no cure-all solution. CBD does, however, do a lot of different things in the body because the system that we have, this endocannabinoid system, basically we make our own cannabis-like chemicals. It affects everything from eating, sleeping, relaxing, stress relief, immune function. So because the system does so much stuff, CBD can do a lot of things too, because it works on this system and other related systems in the brain and the body. So it can do a lot of different jobs in the brain and the body, but certainly nothing is a quick fix or a cure-all. I always tell my patients in integrated medicine, run the other way. If someone says they're going to just give you something and all your problems are going to go away the next day from taking this one bottle of anything, it's just unfortunately not the way we work because we're really complex. So I use it as alongside other herbals, alongside stress reduction techniques, alongside integrated medicine, and oftentimes alongside drugs too, Western medicine drugs. So that's how I see it fitting in. And the medical side, on the wellness side, you probably, you might not need any drugs, but you might still need some herbal help and some help with stress reduction.
Okay, that's really interesting. So your book has come out, the CBD Bible. Talk a little bit as we close out the show about what prompted you to write the book and what you want readers to get out of it.
Sure. So this book is really kind of a labor of love of the last 10 years of my experience as an integrated medicine doctor in botanical medicine and then in cannabis medicine. I've treated thousands of patients with CBD and medical cannabis, and then I've trained a lot of doctors. So I basically wanted to write this because there's a lot of academic books out there for kind of scientists about CBD and cannabis. And then there's a lot of lay books that talk about it kind of on a very kind of superficial level. But I didn't feel like there was a book out there that someone could pick up and flip to the sleep section or flip to, the period section and find out how to actually use it in all the nitty-gritty details. So I just wanted to kind of, spill my guts with all of my secrets and tips that I have found over the years doing this for years and years and years. So people could feel empowered, because I think that's, for me, integrated medicine, that's what it's all about, is empowering my patients. I think when you take the drugs only approach in Western medicine alone, people can feel really unempowered, and they just kind of lose their sense of they can actually help their body rebalance and, their internal sense of hope. And that's where I see integrated medicine being so powerful, because there's so much we can do. You might not be able to cure a chronic disease, but we can improve it so much with these tools. And CBD is one of them. So in the book, we talk about CBD, but not just CBD, also medical cannabis and all the other things in the plant too. So that way, if you want to use it on the medical side, you know how to talk to your doctor about it, because they might not know. They might be open to prescribing it to you, but you might have to educate them on how. So there's a whole section on every problem on that side of it too. And then also in CBD wellness. So things you can pick up from the shop yourself and start today. And then just how to monitor what you're trying to alleviate, and being kind of your own expert.
It's a great book, and I would encourage anyone who's curious about CBD to pick it up. It's really easy to access, and it's just packed full of amazing information. So if listeners come away from this podcast with one thought or one piece of information, what would you want that to be?
Well, I think CBD is not going anywhere. I think it's a wellness trend in some cases, but I think it's also kind of a revolution in botanical medicine. So I would say if you're having any of these period problems, in addition to managing your stress and looking at your diet and your lifestyle, as far as a single botanical that I would consider including, it would probably be CBD. So you can check it out. You can just go to a reputable company. There's a whole section in the book on how to pick a CBD oil as well, not by brand, but by like what's actually in it. And just see for yourself, and just do what you do with any kind of wellness routine. Just track how you're feeling. I have a section there about, like tracking your symptoms and tracking how you're feeling. And, I think that the message is botanical medicine is about empowering yourself about your health and wellness, taking control back. And that's what I see CBD being a part of.
What a great message. Empower yourself. I love that. And I know listeners will too. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If listeners want to buy the book, where can they grab a copy?
So it's in many bookstores, big and small, but because of COVID, that's not been as possible for many booksellers. So Amazon.co.uk. So if you go on UK Amazon, it's there. If you go to my Instagram, I have a link to it. So it should be pretty easy to find. And
where can listeners find out more about you?
So Instagram, I'm Dr Dani Gordon. And there's a link there to my blog, and I post videos there, educational videos, and all the information about upcoming talks I'm doing and all that jazz.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenny's Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.